Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays are for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. Today we are going to be doing a little bit of a diversion from our usual Byzantine topic because we really do need to talk about the rise of Islam and all that comes with it, where it comes from, some of the early tenets of Islam, and their interaction with the Byzantines, because this is going to be the most prominent outside group that the Byzantines are going to be interacting with from here on out. First Arab Muslims, and then later on Turkish Muslims. So we need to understand where they come from, the origins of the Islamic religion, as well as the origins of the Arab people. Just want to say right before we get started, if you have found this video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss another episode. I would say if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Play to give us a follow, but checking that feed recently, we have a number of episodes that are missing from Apple Podcasts, as well as episodes have not been able to post to Google Play for quite a while, Spotify, because I had switched to Zoom to record the podcast, mostly for the video aspect, but I've since decided to postpone doing video podcasts until I can get a better setup, a setup that I like better, with a better background, better lighting, better webcam, and all of that. So hopefully I'm back recording this on GarageBand, so hopefully that'll give me an MP3 file as opposed to I believe Zoom gives you an M4A audio file. So hopefully that will make for a smoother transition onto the podcast platforms, because it really was when I started using the M4A, although I don't know why, because I know the M4A is not compatible with Spotify, but I thought it was compatible with Apple Podcasts, but perhaps that's not the case. Regardless, we'll figure that stuff out as we go along. So, as we mentioned towards the end of the last the end of the last episode, the Arabs had just invaded the Byzantine Empire right around the 630s, I believe. Check the notes here. Yeah, it's really during the 630s, and by the time we hit 640, yes, this is coming back to me now. By the time we hit 640, the Byzantines have lost Syria, Palestine, and Egypt permanently. They are not going to retake any of those provinces, and in fact, that's part of what'll get the Crusades going. As I give a little light to my cigar here, having another cigar while I do this, I feel like the kind of facilitates the lecture a bit. This is a La Flor Dominicana Reserva Especial. This will be what helps facilitate the Crusades later on, because the Byzantine Emperor Alexios is going to make a plea to the Pope to send Western Christians to assist him in fighting back against the Turks and taking back the parts of the Byzantine Empire, specifically Jerusalem. Things definitely don't work out that way, but that was the original play, so to speak. Now, the first group of Muslims are obviously the Arabs, and as time goes on, we'll get interesting kind of debates within Islam as to whether, are Arabs the privileged class of Islam? What do they do? Are what we would call Persian Muslims, are they viewed the same way as Arab Muslims, or Turkish Muslims later on? But that'll all eventually kind of come out in the wash. especially because as time goes on, the dominant states in Islam are going to go from being Arab states to being Turkish states, at least Turkish ruled states. Now, the Arabs, before Islam becomes a religion, are nomads. They're in the Arabian Peninsula, although there are some settled peoples who live along the coast. They engage in a lot of trade that goes on down the Red Sea and out into the Indian Ocean, up the Persian Gulf, and over to India, which we'll talk a bit about here in a minute. And so, in the 500s, you had actually a number of Western Arabs who tended towards some form of Christianity, either Monophysite Christianity or Nestorian Christianity, because of their proximity to the Byzantine Empire and trade with Egypt and Syria. These are areas where Nestorianism and Monophysitism are popular, and so that's going to seep into some of the Arab tribes that are doing business with the Byzantines. They're kind of on the eastern border of the empire. And one of the coastal towns here, which is obviously very important, is the town of Mecca, which sits on a major India-East Africa trade route. Now, the way this basically works, and I may have explained this before on the program, but the way this trade route essentially worked was down right where I guess it would be modern Somalia and the piece of the Arabian Peninsula that is right across the water from it. In that area, you get very, very strong sea winds at one particular time of the year pushing eastward, and then at other times of the year, very strong trade winds pushing westward. And because of that, it is very easy to sail along the coast from, again, what would be today like Somalia and Ethiopia and the old kingdoms of like Axum in Africa and these Arab coastal towns along this trade route. It's very easy for them to sail east to India, and then later on in the year, when the winds are blowing in the opposite direction, to sail back to Africa and Arabia. And the Byzantines actually were able to do a lot of trade with India through sailing down south through the Red Sea to the Axumites and these other Arab groups down there, and they could do trade with them, and then from there, goods could go further south and then eventually head over east towards India. And I remember the way this was described to us when we took Byzantine history was any drunken sailor could get in a little dinghy with a bed sheet posted up on a broomstick, and he managed to sail his way over to India. That's how strong these winds are out there at sea, or at least they were back then. I don't know if it's changed today. But so Mecca was controlled by the merchant class, and they did trade with the Byzantines. And so in Mecca, you also find the Kaaba, which was probably a meteor which fell down from space, lands in and around Mecca, and had previously, before Islam, had been worshipped by Arab pagans beforehand. There is a good deal of the Arabian Peninsula, even though there are Jews on the Arabian Peninsula. There's a good deal of Jews in Mecca, and there are Christians on the Arabian Peninsula, but there also is a good deal of what I've seen described in some places as Semitic paganism. Now, Semitic here is an important word because Arabic is a Semitic language. The English term anti-Semitic in referring to hatred of Jews comes because Hebrew is also a Semitic language. So both Hebrew and Arabic are Semitic languages, which is why you can probably think of a couple of words off the top of your head which are similar in both Hebrew and Arabic, right? Baruch in Hebrew and Barak in Arabic. Turn the page here in our notes. I'm reading a lot of this out of my Byzantine history notebook here from college. But so Muhammad, right, the prophet who is the founder of Islam, he is born in 570 A.D., and he dies in 632 A.D. Now, Muhammad was an orphan, and he was actually raised by his uncle, who was a part of the, let's see, Quraysh tribe. Apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I have no familiarity with the Arabic language. But the Quraysh tribe was one of the more powerful and wealthy Arab tribes at that point in time, and Muhammad's uncle was a well-respected guy in that group, especially among the merchants. He had a lot of influence, wealthy guy as well, and so that's going to help Muhammad rise to prominence here through the prominence of his uncle. Muhammad also married a rich widow, which helped him personally get rich fairly quickly, apart from his uncle. And the fact that he had a lot of money meant that he had a lot of downtime. Right, the wealthier you are, the more leisure you have. This is why, like for example, in the United States, as the United States grew more prosperous through the Industrial Revolution, and especially in the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, you see the rise of some things like spectator sports like baseball, right? Because you're so wealthy as a nation, and people have so much downtime because they don't have to work 14 hours in the field every day that they can go spend several hours in the afternoon watching a baseball game, which is kind of cool. I'm not against that. I love sports myself. Although baseball, I will say, it's difficult for me to watch a full baseball game, especially if it's not my team. My team is the Chicago Cubs, so 2016 was a lot of fun for us. Not very fun this year. They're having a terrible season this year. But it's hard for me to watch a full baseball game, especially even when the Cubs are bad. I definitely can't watch. I can only watch a full baseball game if the Cubs are good. I'm more of a football, both American and European. I do like what we would call in the United States soccer. We have a number of viewers and listeners from outside the United States. So just to clarify there what I mean when I say football. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. And now Muhammad as well, he works as a third-party mediator in negotiations for lots of trade deals and business deals. And then when he is 30 years old, he goes off for a time of self-reflection in a cave, which is where he sort of encounters God. Almost like finding himself, when the basic college-age white girl goes off to backpack in Europe for a year to find herself. It's like, well, you're right here. I found you. You're standing right there in front of me. I never understood what that meant. Just kind of seems like an excuse to take a vacation here. But either way, the reflections that Muhammad has while he's in this cave make up the Quran, which is the holy text of Islam, kind of would be the Islamic equivalent to the Bible. Although Islam does have many of the stories from the Bible, sometimes with a different take on them, or following different characters who are mentioned in the Bible. But obviously, Islam is a monotheistic religion. It traces its roots back to Abraham, so it's one of the three Abrahamic monotheistic religions, along with Judaism and Christianity. Islam claims descendants from Abraham through his son with the serpent girl Hagar, through Ishmael. And they recognize, Muslims as well, recognize a lot of the Judeo-Christian prophets. They trace themselves all the way back to Adam. Obviously, they also trace themselves back to Abraham. They recognize Moses as a prophet. They recognize Jesus as a prophet as well. The difference being they only recognize Jesus as a prophet in the same way that all those other guys are a prophet, and they don't believe that he's the Son of God who's come to redeem all of mankind. And for Muslims, Muhammad is the last and the greatest prophet of God. And he taught, for example, just running through some things that Muhammad had here, which he introduces. He taught, for example, all Arabs were brothers in the Ummah. The Ummah is the community of Muslims. Islamic courts would be a new authority. This would be, maybe some of us have heard of today's Sharia law. So it would be a religious court, not a secular court the same way we have here in the West. Islam also prohibits the killing of babies. This is why Muslims who are serious, following their faith very closely, will be pro-life. Although oftentimes you may see some American Muslim politicians who are pro-choice. I mean, in the same way with Catholics, for example, Joe Biden, President of the United States, claims to be a Catholic, although he is very much in favor of abortion. So sometimes people don't always follow every tenet that their religion has to offer. Let's see here. Muhammad also taught that a divorced man must still support his wife and children after the divorce. So here we have a sort of child support going on. Plural marriages were restricted to a maximum of 4 wives. He also emphasized almsgiving, which just means helping the poor. That's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. In Islam, you cannot eat pork, nor can you consume alcohol. And I believe you also cannot use tobacco products. I don't believe I think Muslims do not believe in like smoking or chewing tobacco or anything like that. In the most part, probably better for you that way. However, you're missing out on the lovely cigars. I'm sure you can hear the click of my lighter here as I just toast mine a little more. I also apologize if you can hear. I have a couple of fans on here in the background, so I do apologize if you can hear that sort of going on in the background. We also get with Islam Ramadan, which is the month of fast, which I believe concluded just recently, just a couple days ago. And then also Muslims must make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least one time in their lives. That is another one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Muslims also pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. And at the start, at least, most Muslim states were a theocracy where the church and the state are combined together in one. And a modern example of that would be Iran, for example. The Iranians are a theocracy where they have a combination of both church and state. I'm just going to pull up here. Sorry, I'm going to pull up here the 5 pillars. I used to be able to say these off the top of my head, but I want to have them in front of me just in case I forget. So the 5 pillars of Islam are the profession of faith, which is saying there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. There's the prayer of 5 times a day. There is almsgiving. There's the fasting, which is Ramadan. And then there's the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is called the Hajj, which we'll kind of talk about the precedent for that there later on here in the show. But so Muhammad starts preaching his new religion here, Islam, around 610. And the people in Mecca are not really fond of it. But the people in Mecca also can't touch Muhammad, even though they're not in favor of what he's saying. They can't do a lot about it because his uncle is still alive, and his uncle is a very prominent person. However, soon after this, Muhammad's uncle dies, and Muhammad has to flee to Medina. This is in 622. So I guess not that soon afterwards. But in Medina, Muhammad is invited in, and they actually make him the leader of the city. And Muhammad accepts this, but he says that Medina has to embrace Islam as their new religion, which they do. And so Medina becomes Muhammad's new headquarters, and there are a number of raids on Meccan trade routes, which Muhammad sets up there in Medina, where he stays for about 8 years, from 622 until about 630. And in 630, Muhammad returns to Mecca and makes Mecca submit to Islam, and he destroys all the pagan structures there. And he is only there for a little bit while longer, until his death in 632 AD. And you'll notice there that that does not bring us to the point where we left off in Byzantine history earlier. And so we do have to take a little journey here of Islamic history after the death of Muhammad. Now, Mecca is the spiritual capital of Islam. It's not the political capital of Islam. It is the spiritual capital. Not sure if there's an equivalent of that in like Christianity, because Rome would be the capital of, say, Catholicism. You could also say it's in many ways it's a political capital. Muhammad's many victories were seen by the Arabs as a sign of God's favor. Essentially, God favors Muhammad. We can tell this because he had so much success in all of his endeavors there. Now the issue becomes, after Muhammad's death, who is going to succeed him as the new leader of Islam. And then you get the Rashidun, who are the first four caliphs, and the caliph is basically like the leaders after Muhammad, who are, again, they're the first four leaders after Muhammad. He had no sons. And later on, you're going to get a split here between the most prominent group of Muslims today called the Sunnis and another group called the Shias. And I remember reading once, I forget the name of the author of this book, but I took kind of a reader survey of Islamic history as a summer course in college. Yes, I can't remember the name of the author of the book, but he got to the part where he talked about the difference between Sunnis and Shias, and he had this, and it's more complicated than this, but he says the basic difference between Sunnis and Shias is that Sunnis are not Shias. Kind of a flippant joke, but one of the reasons that Sunnis and Shias split is over the leadership in Islam, because I believe it is the Shias believe that Muhammad's nephew Ali and the people who come after him are the legitimate leaders of Islam, and the Sunnis do not believe that. They don't believe that the leaders of Islam have to come from the family lineage of Muhammad. But anyway, so the first caliph after Muhammad is a guy named Abu Bakr. He was Muhammad's father-in-law, and he was caliph from 632 until 634. He preserves the works of Muhammad, and after Muhammad died, many Arabs felt no sense of unity, and some actually resorted to paganism. And you get the Ridda Wars, which were fought by Abu Bakr to unite the Arab tribes under his rule. The second caliph you get is a guy by the name of Umar, who is in charge from 634 until 644. And he also has to stave off some civil wars, but he is the guy who plans the invasions both of Persia and of the Byzantine Empire, which we talked about previously, which he carries out both the wars in Persia and the wars against the Byzantines in the name of the Prophet, and these are the first jihads. It's also worth noting here, I should mention, the Hadith, which is the kind of the second foundational holy text of Islam, which is I believe, composition of sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. And part of this is that they say that jihad was the best form of death, better than any other form of death for a Muslim. Best way for you to die is while you're out on the jihad. And so Umar invades Syria. This is what we talked about earlier. And of course, the turning point in the campaign for the Arabs in Syria is the Battle of the Yarmouk River, which I talked about in great detail in our previous episode. So I would say go check that out. I won't go into the detail here just because I've already covered it. Page here again. And so, as we say, once the Arabs blow through Syria, they'll go down through Palestine. They will take Jerusalem, and then by 640, the Arabs will invade Egypt, and that campaign gets wrapped up pretty quickly as well. There's only a small Byzantine force there. It puts up a bit of a fight, but ultimately does not. They do not succeed in defending Egypt. And at that point, as we said before, there's no possibility of reconquest of the territories again, because, as we talked about, the Byzantines had just reconquered these three territories from the Persians right before this, just a couple years previous, and in a quick turnaround. I mean, Heraclius has his triumph there in I think it's 631, and by I think 633. The invasion, I think it's 634, the invasion of the Byzantine by the Arabs begins. All right, where are we going from here? Now, at first, under Muslim rule, Christian communities are treated with a deal of tolerance. They're not harassed at the state level, although one would imagine that kind of at the individual level, there was certainly going to be some tension between the new Arab ruling class and the native Christian communities which they ruled over. And a very interesting thing that we get in the very early days of Islam is that because, and I don't mean for this to come off as some sort of anti-Arab sentiment. This is just kind of the reality of the situation. But the Arabs had been a nomadic people, and they were not accustomed to governing a very complex society, a civilized society, like the Byzantines had. They're inheriting a certain infrastructure and a certain legal system and people who are accustomed to that, and they're just not, they had no history of governing over something like that in their past as a tribal nomadic people. And so in order to maintain the governance and to maintain the infrastructure of this system, they had to employ a lot of Christian like bureaucrats and magistrates, so on and so forth, to maintain the systems which were already in place. And so this is why you get a guy like St. John Damascus, who we'll talk about in future episodes. And St. John Damascus, although he has a Christian name, he has another Arab name, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but he was a decurion, which is like a noble elite in Byzantine society. John Damascus's family was part of the Syrian aristocracy, and he was administrator under the Arab state for some time before he left his secular job to go into religious life. But if I remember it correctly, I believe John Damascus's father, he was also a government administrator under the Byzantines, and I think by the time John Damascus was coming up, the Arabs had already taken. I believe John Damascus never lived under Byzantine rule. But interestingly enough, Greek was the administrative language of the Islamic. I don't know what you want to call it. I guess the caliphate. Greek was the administrative language because all your administrators are native Greek speakers themselves, or at least if they're not native Greek speakers, they speak Greek and they don't speak Arab. Or they're learning Arabic. They don't know Arabic immediately. And the Arab population tends to live separately from the local population. And the Arabs do intermarry with Christian brides, but their children are raised Muslim. And as time goes on, things for Christians and Jews get worse under Islamic rule than they do at the start. For example, you get Christians and Jews pay a higher tax. This is called the jizya. So if you are a Christian living under the Islamic Caliphate, you have to pay an additional tax because you're a different religion. You're not a member of the state religion there. But funny enough, the caliphs didn't want the Christians to convert too quickly because that extra tax revenue they get. Well, if all the Christians convert all at once, then they lose all that tax revenue. And it's like, don't convert too fast there. We still need your money. And as time, conversion away from Christianity and Judaism to Islam is going to, it doesn't happen all at once, but it does happen slowly but surely. Part of the reasons for this, in the early days, Christianity is frowned upon, but it's not illegal. The ringing of bells was made illegal, though, and the bells were what called you to church because obviously you don't have a clock or a watch where you can look at it and say, oh, it's 10:30, time to go to church. The bells would ring and you'd say, oh, okay, it's time to head over to the church. So the ringing of bells was made illegal. Christians were also not allowed to repair existing churches or to build new churches. And so when churches fell into disrepair, as I think I mentioned in the previous episode, older churches are in constant need of fixing up and repairs. Just take a trip to Italy, and basically every church you go to tour, there's going to be some sort of scaffolding up there to do some sort of repair. If you want a recession-proof job, go start a church contracting repair business in Italy, and you will always have some sort of work to do. And so by the year 1000, we're fast-forwarding pretty far here, but by 1000, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt are mostly Muslim with a Christian minority. Obviously, there are still Christian minorities in those regions of the world still today. Fairly notably, the Coptic Christians in Egypt seem to have a pretty consistent 10% of the population there in Egypt. But 750, I have here in my notes, is really the year that Christianity starts to decline. The government takes up Arabic as the administrative language, no longer Greek. And just a few notes to wrap up here. The first kind of dynasty you have here among Muslims, you have the Umayyad dynasty, which reigns over the caliphate from 661 until 750. And then you get the Abbasid caliphate, or the Abbasid dynasty, from Abbas, a guy named Abbas, named after him, which reigns from 750 until 1253, when Baghdad is sacked by the Mongols. And that really, the sack of Baghdad by the Mongols shakes the Islamic world, really does. It was actually greatly celebrated. The sack of Baghdad was greatly celebrated in Christendom because it meant that the Muslims had a big other problem here to worry about, and they would stop their advancement in the fighting against the Christians for a while, and Christendom got a break because the Muslims had to deal with this massive new threat from the East. And so that's all I have for you today. These are, again, this was a look at the early development of Islam, the origins of the Islamic religion, and kind of looking at the same years that we just talked about in Byzantine history from more of a Muslim perspective. Like I said, this is very important. We have to understand this if we want to understand everything moving forward in Byzantine history. And so, if you've made it this far in the video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. And hopefully, at some point in the future, you will hear my voice on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play. And if you are hearing it from my mouth to God's ears, please make sure to give us a follow. And if, again, from my mouth to God's ears, this somehow ends up on Apple Podcasts, please make sure to give us a 5-star review. So thanks for listening, everybody. I'll see y'all next time.